Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson, and thanks for joining us. The Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture is attracting an unprecedented number of visitors since its grand opening last month. The interest is so great that the museum is distributing free timed passes for entry into the museum, and the next available passes are for early next year. Tens of thousands of people were at the National Mall in Washington, D.C. for the dedication of the historic museum, which was led by President Obama.
James Baldwin once wrote, "For while the tale of how we suffer and how we are delighted and how we may triumph is never new, it always must be heard." For while the tale of how we suffer and how we are delighted and how we may triumph is never new, it always must be heard. Today, as so many generations have before, we gather on our National Mall to tell an essential part of our American story, one that has at times been overlooked. We come not just for today, but for all time.
I was born by the river in a little tent, and just like the river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know good change gonna come. Oh yes, we.
Today, a dream too long deferred is a dream no longer. What a grand and glorious day to open a museum that will not just tell of a people's journey, but also of a nation's story. It's hard for me to believe that we are at this moment where we, as a nation, will finally fulfill the expectations and hopes of so many generations who believed and labored for a presence on the National Mall that would help all Americans realize how much they've been shaped, informed, and made better by the African American experience.
Where is our song of love? Where is the song of love? Not a song of love between you and me, but a song of love for all humanity. Where's our love song? Our desperately needed song of love.
As long as there is the United States of America, now there will be a National Museum of African American History and Culture. This is a great achievement. I tell you, I feel like singing the song, Mahalia Jackson's song at the March on Washington over 50 years ago, How We Got Over, How We Got Over. There were some who said it couldn't happen, who said you can't do it, but we did it, we did it. We're gathered here today to dedicate a building, but this place is more than a building. It is a dream come true.
My first guest today attended the museum's dedication. That's such a huge day in Washington and around the country. She also has the distinction of having led two similar African-American cultural gems, the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee, and the Charles H. Wright Museum here in Detroit. I'm pleased to have Juanita Moore back with us on American Black Journal. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so a huge day. I mean, you think about the people who gave speeches, the songs that were sung, and the words that people put together to welcome this museum to our National Mall, which is, of course, where most of our important national museums are. Just talk really quickly about the day and the spirit there on the mall as we open this museum.
Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing. You know, you start the day and you get there thinking that you walk in, and of course the line is like 4 blocks long.
Right.
First of all, 4 blocks long, and you see, you know, just amazing faces of people from everywhere standing in line to get into the ceremonies. And, you know, people had children there, and there were seniors there, and there were so many Detroiters there.
Yeah,
you know,
I would
to
imagine,
walk down
right?
that line, and as you know, I'm going down the line to get to the end of the line since I was a little, you know, not knowing that it would be 4 blocks long.
Right.
I kept had the opportunity to stop hugging people because there were so many Detroiters that were there for the event. It was absolutely the most amazing experience to open this museum that, you know, people have worked really hard for decades, and to have known some of those people and know that they've now passed on and didn't get an opportunity to see the fruits of their labor, but to know that it really has happened is just...
And the story of this museum I love, because it really is, it boils down to one person who decided it needed to happen and just worked and worked and worked and worked. And many years later, and lots of other people sort of coming to the table to help later, it actually happens. I mean, that really is, I think, symbolic of the kind of struggle that this is trying to commemorate.
I think so, absolutely. And that's really, if you think about it, that's the story of so many of our museums. Dr. Wright with the Charles Wright Museum.
Absolutely.
You know, the DeSable, Margaret Burroughs at the DeSable Museum.
Yeah.
You start to think about all of those, you know, these people, you know, Aurelia Brooks out in the California African American Museum, Harry Robinson down at the Dallas African American Museum. You have all of these people in these museums all over the country where you have these individuals that's worked and worked and work, and then people in their community stepped up to help them make it happen. So it is only fitting that this museum has come and been being birthed the way that it has been.
Yeah. As I said in the open, you led the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. You lead the Charles H. Wright here. Put this new museum in sort of context. I mean, it's a different iteration of this story. My understanding is that the collection is, of course, just huge. I mean, gargantuan, and it probably will take me several days, I think, when I finally get to Washington to get through it. But put it in the context of the other museums. I mean, we're all familiar with the Wright here. Lots of people have been to the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. What makes this one different?
It's a Smithsonian institution.
Well,
when you think
start
about
there, right?
you start right there with the whole, you say it is a Smithsonian institution. And when you look at the museums of the Smithsonian, and you think about that they represent the history and culture of this country, because that's what when people come to this country, everybody wants to go to Washington, D.C. to start there as a story. And so this museum, in many ways, helps to complete that story. Of course, there are other stories left to be told and to be added, but this was a big piece that was missing. And when you go to the Smithsonian institutions, and to have this museum added and finally have that voice added to the story of American history, it was just, I mean, it was just such heart-rendering and just amazing to be there and to see the look on people's faces. And they kept, there was one elderly woman that they, you know, that the cameras kept flashing to her so you could see her, and every time you would see her face, you understood the power of this museum, because it was like, I remember being at a voting booth once, and I was in Memphis, and it was the first time that a Black person had ran for mayor, and there was a woman that was there in line. It was a really long line, and they kept saying, "Well, do you want to get out of the line?" And she said, "No, honey, I would have been here today if I'd had to crawl."
Right, right.
It meant that much to her.
Yeah.
So you saw that kind of that meaning for people that were there
Yeah.
and standing in line and waiting to be a part of that.
Yeah. I think for a lot of people who aren't familiar with the museum, you might sort of look at this idea and think that this is somehow a downer, right? That it's about slavery, and it's about Jim Crow, and it's about this sort of long narrative journey that African Americans have sort of suffered in this country. But looking at some of the coverage of it and looking at the collection, it seems to me that it does a better job of sort of uplifting the Black experience and sort of celebrating it in ways while still dealing with all of those other sort of ugly things in our past.
Yeah, I think that it's what it does is it adds this really major part to American history that we've missed.
We've ignored.
And the story
just
that
ignored.
we've just and we know that America's story is one of triumph, it is one of challenges, it is one of disappointments, it is one of achievement. It's all of that. I was just sharing with you that President Bush that day,
Yeah.
I was writing down one of his quotes. He said, "A great nation doesn't hide from its challenges. It faces its flaws and corrects them."
Yeah.
And
What a wonderful
what a wonderful
idea,
thing to have
right?
said.
Yeah.
And that was a challenge. That was missing when you start to look at the story of America, and in all of its flaws and triumphs and beauty and all of it. That was missing. It was missing as you walk through the Smithsonian institutions.
Yeah, yeah. I
And
mean,
so,
if you go to the other museums, Black people are represented a little bit, but not very much.
not very much. So you wanted that to have that story there. And it is the largest of the Smithsonian Institution museums.
Yeah.
And
I mean, just the size of that building.
just the size of the building. It's the largest of it. So, and it's spectacularly, it's beautiful. It is so gorgeous that, you look at the building and go, wow.
Right,
Just, that's uplifting in and of itself.
Yeah.
And then to walk in it, to know that you can go through all of those years of history. Now, it's just not history. Like all African American museums I know, it is not just a history museum.
Right.
It is art, it is dance, it is theater, it is a totality of the African American experience in America.
Yeah.
But it's not all of it, because there's not enough walls.
couldn't do that,
That's
right?
why. But I think in what people do, they will go to DC and see this story and know that there's so much other parts of the story to see and hear. And they would come to the Charles Wright Museum,
Yes.
they would go to the National Civil Rights Museum, they would go to the American Jazz Museum, they would go to the California African American Museum, they would go to the DeSable in Chicago, they would go to Texas, they would go to Birmingham, they would go to all of our institutions and see,
And start to really
understand and be proud of what exists in their own backyards.
Yeah. All right. As always, thanks very much for being here. And I'm jealous that you were there and I was not, but I will get there soon.
Absolutely. And then you won't even remember that you weren't there.
That's right. That's right. It'll be my experience too.
Yes.